My name's Josh, and this happened in the summer of 2002 when I was 25. I was working part-time hauling equipment and tools for my cousin's landscaping business out of Logan, Utah. Every now and then I'd do a long delivery down to Monticello or Moab and take the back highways just to avoid the interstates. I liked the solitude, and back then, I didn't really think much about how risky that could be. On June 24th, I was coming back north after a delivery and decided to take Highway 191, which cuts through long stretches of desert and brush between Rock Springs and Vernal. It's scenic but remote. Once you're past the towns, you can drive for 30 or 40 minutes without seeing another car. Around 4:15 in the afternoon, I spotted a silver Toyota Corolla pulled off the shoulder. The hood was up and the front bumper looked a little busted, so I slowed down thinking maybe it was someone who hit a deer. As I got closer, I saw a man standing next to it. He was waving one arm at me. I pulled over and stepped out. The guy walked up to me kind of fast, limping on one side, holding his other arm close to his stomach. He was sweating bad, had dirt on his jeans, and his shirt was dark and soaked across his side. I asked if he was all right, and he said, "I need a hospital. I crashed. Please, man." But something was immediately off. His shirt wasn't just dirty. It was soaked with blood, and not in a pattern I'd expect from a car crash. There were two distinct wet spots, one near his ribs and another on his bicep, like gunshot wounds. I didn't say that out loud, but I saw it. He was trying to keep pressure on them, and up close you could see the wound edges were small and round, not jagged or scraped. I stood there for a second, not sure what I was stepping into. I asked if anyone else was in the car. He said no. I asked if he needed me to call someone, and he said, "No signal. Please, just get me to the nearest hospital." He looked pale and was having trouble staying upright, so I told him I'd take him. He didn't want to bleed in the cab and asked to ride in the bed of my truck. I had a tarp from a previous job, so I laid it out and helped him climb in. He laid down flat, holding his side. I got back in and started driving north toward Vernal, which was the closest town with a hospital. I was trying to stay calm, but my brain was spinning the whole way. Why did he say crash? Where was the wreck? His car looked barely damaged. There was no glass or bent frame, just the hood up and the bumper slightly off. No airbag deployed, no skid marks. He never made a sound in the bed of the truck. I kept checking the mirror, making sure he didn't stop moving. He didn't speak or try to sit up the entire time. About 45 minutes later, I pulled into Ashley Regional Medical Center in Vernal and flagged someone down at the ER entrance. They brought out a gurney, and he managed to roll off the tailgate with some help. A nurse asked what happened, and I just said I found him like that near 191. They wheeled him inside, and that was the last time I saw him. The next morning, I called the hospital asking if they needed my statement or any info. The nurse on the phone said they couldn't release anything about his condition and that someone might call me if needed. No one did. 2.5 weeks later, I was at my parents' place in Ogden watching the local news when they ran a segment about a man's body found in a dry creek bed just off Highway 191, not far from where I picked up that guy. The anchor said the man appeared to have died from multiple gunshot wounds and that the case was being investigated as a possible homicide. What made it even weirder was that the body had been partially buried. Then the reporter mentioned that authorities were looking into whether this case could be connected to another incident involving an unidentified man dropped off at the hospital in late June. That was it. No follow-up, no names, no arrests. I kept checking the news for updates for a few weeks after that, but it never came up again. No one called me, no one asked for a statement. It felt like the whole thing disappeared. To this day, I don't know who that man was. I don't know if he was the one who pulled the trigger or the one running from someone else. I don't even know if the car he was in was really his. But when you give a ride to someone who's bleeding from gunshot wounds and claiming it was a crash, and then you see a report about someone being found dead not far from that spot, it changes the way you think about helping strangers. I still drive Highway 191 from time to time for work, but I don't stop anymore. Not unless it's a state trooper with lights flashing or a car I recognize. I tell people this story and most of them think I helped a victim. But I don't know. Part of me wonders if I gave a ride to someone who had just left someone else out there to die. And part of me is glad I never saw his face clearly again. I've been through a lot since then. I've served overseas, seen things I'd rather forget, and been in situations where life or death was decided in seconds. But what happened to me in 1999, when I was just 16 years old, is still one of the most disturbing nights of my life. Not because of what I saw exactly, but because of how close it felt to being the last thing I'd ever see. I was living with my uncle in Elko, Nevada at the time. My mom had sent me out there for a while after some trouble I'd gotten into back home. That night, I had borrowed my uncle's old '86 Chevy Silverado to drive up to a small supply store a few towns over to grab some things. I didn't know the area well. I was new to driving and even worse at understanding gas mileage. There was no GPS back then. I had a printed direction from a friend, and that was it. I took this lonely 2-lane road, supposedly a shortcut, through a stretch of Nevada desert heading north. It was already getting dark, and after a while, I realized I hadn't passed another car in over an hour. That road felt like it went on forever. Eventually, I noticed the gas gauge was nearly empty. Panicked a little. I didn't really know how far the next town was, and I had no way to call anyone. There was no cell phone in the truck, and I didn't own one yet either. I slowed down to about 40 miles an hour, hoping to stretch whatever gas I had left. That's when I passed a small cabin-style house just off the side of the road. It was maybe 100 yards from the road, and I remember it had a single yellowish light in the front window. That was the only sign of life I'd seen in miles. I didn't stop. I just looked at it as I passed. The light was comforting in a way. About 5 minutes later, the truck sputtered and completely died. I coasted it to the shoulder and sat there for a minute, trying not to freak out. Then I remembered the house. Couldn't be more than a mile or so back, and I figured that maybe someone there could help me, or at least let me use a landline phone. So I grabbed the weak flashlight I kept in the glove box and started walking. When I got back to the cabin, something immediately felt off. The light in the window was gone. The whole place was dark now. I walked up to the front door and knocked, then knocked again. I waited. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. No creaking floors. It was like no one had ever been there. I tried peeking into the window. I could barely see through the dusty glass, but from what I could tell, there was furniture inside. A chair, a table, a coat on a hook. It didn't look abandoned. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. At that point, I was starting to panic. It was cold, completely silent, and my flashlight was starting to flicker because I hadn't changed the batteries in months. I turned around, ready to head back to the truck and just wait inside it for someone, anyone, to pass by. That's when I heard it, rustling, coming from the brush behind the cabin. I froze and turned. Then I heard laughing, a woman's laugh, but it wasn't right. It didn't sound warm or amused. It sounded a mocking. It echoed slightly and then just stopped. I pointed the flashlight in the direction of the sound, but it was too weak. I didn't see anything. I started walking fast, then jogging. When I got close to my truck, I stopped dead in my tracks. There were two people standing next to it. One was a man, maybe mid-30s, heavy build, wearing some kind of jacket. The other was a woman, long dark hair, barefoot. She was leaning into the passenger side window. She had my duffel bag in her hands. Then she laughed. It was the same exact laugh I heard in the brush. The man was holding something in his right hand, a metal bar or maybe a pipe, and was tapping it against the back window. I saw him raise it slightly and strike the glass. I backed away slowly, then turned and ran full speed back toward the cabin. I didn't look back. I don't think I even breathed. When I got there, I was gasping for air. Still no lights, no sounds. I crouched behind the cabin and scanned the road, praying that a car would pass. None did. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps on the gravel. 2 sets. I ducked into the tall grass near the back of the house and stayed low. Then I saw them. The man and the woman walked calmly up to the front door and unlocked it. They lived there. They didn't look around, didn't speak. Just walked inside like nothing happened. That's when it really hit me. They turned off the lights not because they were asleep or scared. They turned them off because they saw me pass by. I stayed hidden until I was sure they were asleep or gone. I waited what felt like an hour, then ran back down the road, keeping to the edge. I walked for what felt like miles until I saw headlights in the distance. It was a county work truck. I flagged it down, and the guy driving was an older man who looked at me like he already knew something was off before I even spoke. I didn't tell him everything. I just said I'd run out of gas and 2 people were messing with my truck. He took me into town, and we filed a report at the sheriff's station. They found the truck the next day. Windows smashed, duffel bag gone, no fingerprints, nothing else. When they checked the cabin, the sheriff told me it was technically unregistered. Nobody should have been living there. No one in the county even had a name for the people I described. He told me, "You're lucky you didn't knock harder." That night changed the way I think about isolation, about strangers, about what people are capable of when no one's watching. And no amount of combat training or deployments ever replaced the very first time I was truly afraid of being left alone to die in the dark. My name's Aaron, and this happened to me and my cousin Jake back in October of 2002 when I was 19. He was 18 at the time, and we were both trying to make the most out of our last fall before he went into the Army. We had this idea to drive out to the Ouachita Mountains, which stretch between Arkansas and Oklahoma, and do a quick weekend camping trip before it got too cold. We packed light, just a tent, some canned food, a cooler with bottled water and a few sandwiches, a couple of flashlights, and a beat-up road atlas. No smartphones back then, just a Nextel flip phone that I mostly used for texting and only got signal near towns. Jake had his old Nokia 3390, which could survive a nuke but barely picked up a signal even in Little Rock. We didn't think much about it. We left Mena, Arkansas around 2 p.m. on a Saturday and followed a route that supposedly led us to a quiet campground area near Big Brushy Creek, which is deep in the Ouachita National Forest. We wanted peace and isolation. We got it at around 4:30 p.m. after driving over an hour down a gravel forestry road with almost no signs. We passed a small wooden post that said, Forest Route 38A. There was a thin, overgrown trail that led off to the left, and based on the map we had, that was close to the spot where we'd park and hike down to the creek. So we turned in. The road was rough, covered in leaves and branches. Jake was driving his dad's old 1995 Ford Ranger, and the thing didn't have 4-wheel drive, but we figured we'd be fine since the weather was dry. We passed a few pull-off areas and fire rings, but we didn't see another person the whole time. That made sense. It was late in the season, and we were way off the main paths. We got out and set up our tent in a small clearing surrounded by pine and hickory trees. It was dead quiet. No wind, no bugs, just distant bird sounds. We were maybe 100 yards from the dirt road, and we kept our cooler and bags near the truck so we wouldn't attract animals. By 6 p.m. the sun had dropped low, and by 6:45 it was pretty much dark under the trees. We got a small fire going and sat around it eating sandwiches and joking about how we'd probably get eaten by a bear. Around 7:30 we heard something that made us stop laughing. It was a motor, faint at first, but definitely a vehicle moving somewhere in the distance. That wouldn't be weird normally, except we hadn't seen a car or a person since we left the main road 4 hours earlier. Jake put out the fire so the smoke wouldn't show, and we sat still. The engine sound got louder, closer, and then it stopped completely. We didn't see headlights, but we could tell it was somewhere behind the trees, probably parked on the same trail we came down. We waited a few minutes, listening. Nothing. Then we heard footsteps. They weren't sneaky. They weren't crashing through the brush either. Just steady, slow walking, crunching leaves. Someone was out there walking near our tent, maybe 30 or 40 feet out. Jake whispered that it was probably just a ranger checking on us, which seemed possible, except we had no permit or anything on our windshield because we hadn't found the ranger station we were supposed to stop at. And why would a ranger pull up without lights and walk in the dark without calling out? We stayed quiet. After a few minutes, the steps faded away, and we didn't hear anything else. No car starting, no talking, just silence. We stayed awake until about 9:30 p.m., then crawled into the tent and zipped it up. Jake kept his knife in his hand, and I kept the flashlight on my chest just in case. Neither of us really slept. Around 10:20, we heard something again. This time it was voices. 2 men. whispering just outside the tent. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but one of them sounded like he was saying numbers or letters, like a string of something, maybe a plate number or coordinates. It made no sense. Jake sat up and looked at me, and I saw him mouth, "Two of them." I slowly unzipped the tent just enough to peek out, but I didn't see anything. I turned the flashlight on for half a second and aimed it toward where the voices had been. There was nothing but trees and the faint glint of something metal, like a truck bumper. We didn't wait around to find out. We grabbed our boots, left the tent behind, and ran the 100 yards back up to Jake's truck. We didn't even turn on the headlights. He backed out down the trail with just the parking lights on and turned onto the gravel road heading east. We didn't speak for almost 10 minutes. He finally said, "They were waiting near the fire pit, just standing there." I asked him how he saw that, and he said when we ran, he glanced back and saw the two figures move out from behind the trees. No flashlights, no sound, just walking toward our tent like they already knew where it was. We didn't get cell signal until after 11 p.m., near a gas station about 30 miles west of Hot Springs. We stopped there and called local non-emergency, reported what happened. The sheriff who called us back didn't sound surprised. He said that over the years, there had been people squatting deep in the forest, and sometimes it wasn't clear if they were just drifters, survivalists, or people avoiding law enforcement. He said, "You were smart to leave. That area's remote, and we don't patrol it unless there's a reason." We drove back to Mina that night and never went back to that part of the forest again. The weirdest part was that when we told one of Jake's uncles, who used to do logging in that region back in the 80s, he just nodded and said something like, "You don't camp off Route 38A unless you want company." I still wonder what would have happened if we had stayed quiet inside the tent or if we hadn't heard the whispers. It wasn't a ghost story. It was just people, real ones, who were out there with us in the middle of nowhere in the dark, and for whatever reason they were watching. This happened back in July of 2005 when I was 22. I had just gotten my first real job after community college, working construction up in central Washington. My cousin was getting married in northern Nevada, so I decided to drive down from Yakima to McDermott, which is a tiny town right on the Nevada-Oregon border. If you've never heard of it, you're not alone. Back then it was just a gas station, a casino, and a few dusty roads. Instead of sticking to the interstate and going the long way through Boise, I took a route someone recommended to me, Highway 205 through eastern Oregon. It's supposed to be a scenic shortcut. What nobody told me is that it's also completely empty, like no gas stations, no traffic, no nothing for hours. This was before smartphones were everywhere. I had a flip phone, no GPS, just a printed MapQuest page in my glove box and a paper Oregon road atlas that I barely knew how to read. I left Burns at about 4:45 p.m. It was hot but bearable, probably around 90 degrees. I had a full tank and a cooler in the back seat with some water and a sandwich, so I figured I was good. At first, the drive was peaceful. Just flat land, low hills, lots of sky, and every now and then a hawk or an antelope in the distance. But once I passed French Glen, it started to feel like I was the only person out there. No cars coming toward me, none behind me, no houses, no power lines. The only thing I saw was a couple of empty trailers and some cattle fences. That's when the road started to narrow and the pavement got rougher. The speed limit dropped, and I hit a stretch where it turned into a single-lane road with gravel shoulders and old faded paint. Around 6:10, I noticed an old green mile marker with no number on it, just bent sideways. Then, about 10 minutes later, I saw something off to the right, an old dirt road turnoff. There was no sign, no name, but it looked like a ranch access road. There were old tire tracks in the dirt, and I noticed what looked like a mailbox halfway buried in the brush. It was rusty and dented. I remember thinking it was strange because I hadn't seen a house or any buildings at all for miles. I slowed down just a little to glance down the dirt road as I passed, curved off into some hills and disappeared into trees. I didn't see any buildings, but I got this weird feeling like I shouldn't look too long. About 10 minutes after passing that road, I looked in my rearview mirror and I saw a vehicle behind me that hadn't been there before. It was an old blue Ford Bronco, maybe early 90s model. At first I thought I'd missed them coming onto the road behind me, but then I realized something strange. There hadn't been any roads or turnouts for several miles except that one dirt road, which meant whoever was behind me had probably come from that direction. I kept driving and they kept pace behind me. Not close enough to tailgate, but close enough to stay in my mirror. The road was too narrow for them to pass, but there was also no reason for them to be that close unless they were doing it on purpose. I tapped my brakes once to see if they'd back off. They didn't. The road curved up into some hills and started to get a little rougher. The pavement had long cracks and a few potholes. I was going about 40, trying not to damage my suspension, but the Bronco stayed close. That's when I started to get nervous. I pulled over at a gravel patch on the side of the road just before a cattle guard. I got out of my car, popped my hood, and pretended to check the engine just to give the impression I wasn't in any kind of rush. I wanted to see who was behind me and maybe let them pass. But instead of passing, the Bronco pulled over about 100 feet behind me and just sat there. Engine running, lights off, driver still inside. I stood by my hood for a good minute, acting like I was looking at something under it. Then I just got back in my car and drove off. The Bronco waited a few seconds, then pulled out and followed again. By now it was close to 7 p.m. The sun was low and the road had gotten even more remote. The hills were taller, and it was getting hard to see anything beyond the next bend. I started speeding up a little, trying to put distance between us, but the road didn't allow for much speed and I didn't want to crash out there alone. At one point I came around a bend and saw a dirt service road to the left that wasn't marked on my map. I passed it, then quickly pulled over just around the corner where I couldn't be seen. I shut off my car and waited. Sure enough, a few seconds later, the Bronco came around the bend, driving slowly, then they passed right by without seeing me. I waited a full minute after they disappeared around the next curve, started my car back up, turned around, and took that dirt road in the opposite direction. I had no idea where I was going, but I figured anything was better than staying on the same road as that vehicle. The dirt road was rough. I drove maybe 15 minutes, bouncing over rocks and barely able to see through the dust. I passed a dried-up cattle trough and what looked like an old windmill tower. Finally, I saw a metal gate up ahead. There was a no trespassing sign, but beyond it I saw the edge of a small cabin or shack. I didn't go closer. I turned around in a small clearing and just parked with the engine off. I sat there for nearly an hour, drinking water and listening. Every little sound made me jump. I kept the windows halfway down because it was cooling off fast, and I didn't want to kill the battery using the AC. Just after dark, I turned the car back on and started driving back toward the highway, headlights off until I was almost at the road. When I got there, I stopped and watched both directions for about 5 minutes. Nothing. No lights. No vehicles. I got back on 205 and finished the drive to McDermott. I didn't get there until almost 10:15 p.m. My cousin thought I got lost and didn't believe half of what I told him until I showed him the map and where I had pulled off. To this day, I don't know who was driving that Bronco or why they followed me. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't hidden off the road, but I never used that route again. And if I ever have to drive a remote highway now, I always check for service zones, carry a printed map, and never take shortcuts I don't know.